John Costa. I run something called Citizens Eye, which is a community news agency, so I'm a freelance journalist. We're kind of really big into it here in the city and the county, and what we do is we try and encourage our reporters to cycle, and that's how we originally got involved with Andy Selkeld. So a lot of our young reporters have gone off and done bikeability training, for example. They've led on the scootability training that we're doing as well. And what we thought we'd do with the conference, because we're in the middle of our Community Media Week, this is day 4 for me, that's why I look like this. I am 28 and I normally have dark hair, which hopefully will come back on Wednesday. What we thought we'd do is we've had young people in today doing some sort of bike-related workshops. Karen's done one for us this afternoon around cycling cultures and what we can learn from watching a fantastic Youth Bike Summit video, which hopefully will be on display later on tonight when we go down and watch some films in the screen room. And also done a bike jewellery workshop, which has been great. Is to try and get the young people interested. So certainly my question to you, give you an heads up, just so you know, will be young people related. What we thought we'd do is just invite you to like an in-conversation. This is something that we've trialled here in Leicester, and certainly down in London as well recently, it's like, you know when you meet an author, and every page you read, there's another 10 pages they could have written, and every time you watch a minute of film, there's another hour that wasn't in it. And the idea really was to have like an out loud in conversation. When someone signs your book and you go to walk off and you really just like say, can I go to the bar and ask you all these questions? This is what tonight's about. This conference, building a cycling, a culture around cycling, is not about us telling you what to do. You guys are out there every day, you're involved in it, you know how it affects where you are, where you live in the world, your part, your postcode, that kind of stuff. And it's very much about interaction. So, with all due respect to the guys sitting at the front here, you know, these guys need you as much as you need them. So what I'd like to think is, and that's my role as the person doing all the media this weekend, is to make sure that I capture interviews with as many of you as possible about what you do, as well as these guys at the front, because it's only when we capture the culture that's already going on can we bring it all together to make sure that we're building it. So hopefully tonight, I'm going to ask them each a question after they've introduced themselves, and then the questions are all over to you. And in fact, they might even ask you some questions. That would be pretty cool. Yeah? Everybody happy with that? Anybody else got any questions? Yeah? So it's not about us talking to you, it's interaction. So I'm going to kick off. And I think if, maybe starting with Karen at the end, our furthest visitor. Anyone come further than New York? Geographically? No, she won that with the Young People's Conference earlier as well. So I'd only come 20 minutes, I felt a bit guilty of that. So what we'll do, if we start with you, maybe just 1 minute, just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do and all that for those people.
Sure.
Not unaware. Is that right? Thanks.
I'm Karen Overton. I'm the founder of Recycle a Bicycle, which is a youth job training and environmental education program in New York City. And we have, we initiated this as a program of the New York City advocate group, Transportation Alternatives, as the youth project. And then we grew quickly and spun off to become our own organization. So we started out with recycling bikes and providing social services, but more recently we've been undertaking advocacy projects with young people, and they have a lot to say, and the adults can learn it as much from working with them as from teaching them. And recently we've initiated taking groups to our National Advocacy Bike Day and lobbying, and it's been a huge success. And from that we learned that we need to get more youth involved in the advocacy to expand the diversity and bring in more young voices in our movement back in America. And we organized a Youth Bike Summit, which we thought was going to be a local program. It attracted young people from 13 states in Canada. And I think I'm very encouraged coming here. I think we'd like to make it international, include the Leicester youth as well.
Cool, thank you very much. Rachel, do you want to go next?
Okay, I'm Rachel Aldred. I'm a lecturer in sociology at the University of East London, and I'm principal investigator on a project that's funded by the Economic and Social Research Council that's called Cycling Cultures, and it's looking at cycling in 4 areas within England, 4 urban areas where cycling levels are relatively high: Bristol, Cambridge, Hackney and Hull. So I'm going to be talking about that project a bit more tomorrow. I've also set up a sustainable mobility through research group at the University of East London, and we've got kind of some little projects going on as well. So, for example, there's one on cycle training, and I recently trained myself as a cycling instructor, which was quite interesting. I like the research to be quite hands-on and to be, you know, so that I go out and do the stuff and learn about the stuff, as well as interviewing people about things. It's mainly qualitative research. So, I think.
Cool. John?
I'm John Arcott. I'm the policy director at the New York City Transportation Department. And what that job is really helping the commissioner, who's the head of the department, steer the agency in terms of its overall direction. And it's an interesting story because I came from the bike advocacy world. I ran transportation alternatives years back, and I've been involved in different transportation policy and lobbying organizations ever since. And we had a real breakthrough in 2007 when the Mayor Bloomberg released the sustainability plan for the city, and it was all about creating much more public space, creating cycling as a real option for people, doing a lot more with mass transit, and you know, really reducing the city's carbon footprint, which is already very low by American standards. So there's a real reform group at the transportation department, and we've been doing, you know, a huge amount of change on the city streets, which I'll show you pictures of tomorrow.
Dave, last but not least.
Cheers, John. Hi, I'm Dave Horton. I'm a sociologist at Lancaster Environment Centre at Lancaster University. I'm also attached to the Centre for Mobilities Research, which is based there. I'm working on a project called Understanding Walking and Cycling, which I'll talk about tomorrow, which, like Rachel's project, has done research in 4 English cities, but the cities we've chosen have been cities with lower levels of cycling generally. So that's included Leicester, but also Lancaster, Worcester and Leeds. I'm a bit of a cycling nutter, I suppose. My project is beyond, although I'm an academic, I'm not really a kind of entrenched academic. I'm sort of much more of a cycling campaigner or activist, and my mission is to kind of, you know, help build cycling culture or cycling cultures. So yeah, I'm involved in cycling in lots of different ways.
Brilliant. Well, I've certainly changed my first question to you because I want to know what an entrenched academic is.
Is that me?
Oh, right.
No.
I'm intrigued. What I'll do, if I ask you a question in the order that you introduce yourself, is that all right? Basically what I've done is they've each submitted a bio, which is in the programme for tomorrow. When did these become available, Janet?
First thing tomorrow morning.
First thing tomorrow morning. So I know what they're about, so hopefully you'll learn a bit more. When you read the bio, their questions will actually back that up. That's a good test, isn't it? So if I start with Karen, we saw what you did earlier with the young people from the Wave that we run, the Young People's newspaper here, and the Children's Council and the Wave Club and stuff like that. How important do you think it is in order to start building a cycling culture that you engage young people at an earlier age as possible?
I think it's critical. I think young people have they have the energy and a vision that often adults don't listen to, and our school system in America often doesn't encourage critical thinking. And so by creating projects that are after school programs that are slightly alternative, we have a little more latitude to tapping into that energy. And I think our experience at Recycle a Bicycle is that they can become very effective advocates and go on to do amazing things. At our Youth Bike Summit, we had a young woman who just graduated from high school, completed her first year of college. Because of her speaking engagement at the Youth Bike Summit, she's been invited to do 3 speaking tours across the United States. So if you give people, if you nurture them and give them the space, they can fill that space and they can be very effective. And I think that's what our movement needs, is more young energy.
Brilliant. I'm sure you'll get some more questions about that from the floor. Rachel, if I move on to you, who's looking here about you saying that cycling cultures includes things like talks and zines and, you know, academic articles and things like that. What we've got here is a good collective of bike organisations that already exist in Leicester and come in and out as well from the county, called Drive Leicester, and has already got some Cycle City related workshops and stuff. And what we're trying to do with Citizens Eye is work in partnership with the colleagues involved in Ride Leicester and set up a Ride Leicester news agency, which in fact this is the very first kind of thing that we'll be covering under the Ride Leicester news agency banner. Do you think trying to capture as many different reasons why people cycle, and whether it's bike jewellery or bike art, or women getting into cycling groups and that kind of stuff, road racing, it's important to try and collect that all together in one thing. Do you think something like a news agency would actually help in that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing that people have said when we've interviewed them often is that they would like a source where everything is available together, that sometimes people feel that it's difficult to piece everything. There's a lot of different sources, but it could be useful to have everything together in one place. And I think it's important to have all these different representations as well. It's important that people think, yeah, cycling is something that people like me do, or people like the person that I would like to be perhaps do. Cycling is something that it's not just a totally different group that does. So I think all these different representations, and also one of the things that's coming out of our research is the multitude of reasons, the multitude of things that people get out of cycling. So one thing is the distinctive relationship that you might have to your local environment when you're on a bike, the way that you interact with people and with things, which is different to if you're in a car, or if you're on foot, or if you're on public transport. So the more that we can bring out these multiple co-benefits, these multiple things that people find exciting and interesting about cycling, I think is very helpful.
Okay. Just to put it in context, we've found with some of the 19 other news agencies we run here, all that are volunteer-led, is that sometimes we support local partners and stuff like that in creating in-house service user newsletters, and we end up getting them to join the news agency because they tend to go for funding against, if you like, in competition, can actually come together, and we're finding that some of our news agencies are actually being able to address some of the real issues around funding and that kind of stuff because all the partners are involved. It's not one organisation that's bearing the brunt of it because they can actually lose their funding. Okay, brilliant, thank you. John, asked you a question. 27 days ago today, well-ish, Thursday, Friday, we had a new city mayor elected here in Leicester, and he comes forward with things around, green issues, things like, support of the cultural quarter, cycling, big advocate, would like to have a bike programme, and I think you actually meet your representatives of his cabinet while you're here. Do you find that, in your own experience with Mayor Bloomberg, that it was politicians and decision makers becoming interested in cycling, or was it cyclists and advocates becoming politicians that actually helped that transition, that kind of critical moment when suddenly it became a good idea to start making bike lanes and cycling?
It was both. It was really.
Because we've got a bike for the mayor downstairs.
Okay. Well, what happened in the New York situation was that there was a long-term development of an agenda and a broad concept of what the city could be from a cycling point of view. And from a density and a topography, point of view, it should be a huge cycling city. But it was always crowded out because of the way the streets were designed. And so what happened was when the politicians sort of got it, everybody was ready to go, for the most part. I mean, there's some growing pains, and there's some transition between sort of a protest orientation by a lot of the campaigners to, okay, now the city agrees with us, so how can we help? And that's taking a little bit of work. But it was really about, you have to be ready when the revolution comes, and it came quickly. And the fact that I'm in the city is evidence of that. But it was absolutely critical. I mean, especially I find in running a city, the difference between competence and incompetence, and the difference between leadership and somebody who has their finger in the wind all the time, is much more dramatic than the difference between left and right. It's really about, Mayor Bloomberg was a Republican when I joined the administration, and a few months later he became an independent. And there are people from all over the spectrum in the administration because they understand that it wants to do things.
Okay. We have politicians that do that as well.
Yeah.
Move about a bit. Looking through your information here, and obviously spoken to you as well, and your understanding walking and cycling project that you've got. We've got quite recently a new phenomenon here in the city, a critical mass that happens the last Friday of the month. And I know that the people involved in it are from a variety of backgrounds, the kind of the key instigators in it. In fact, one of them's in the room here. And what you've got is it's built around developing themes. So rather than it just being kind of, I suppose, what people would term like bike advocates and activists and stuff like that, it's been very much developed around having a theme for each one, you know, tapping into sort of topical themes or seasonal themes. And what they've found is they've got a lot of people that are, you know, women are turning up more than I think we're expected, if we're actually honest with each other, and also families. And I think the one last Friday we had a dog, and we had people, you know, kids being pulled in buggies, and it was a real kind of party atmosphere. And certainly the Brazilian drummers, I think, is one never to be forgotten. But do you think something like understanding cycling and walking, it's about these critical masses of things happening that people suddenly realise that they're useful, which will then kind of bring the politicians that think, oh, actually, there's a potential thing here that we could tap into. Maybe it would be a vote winner.
Jesus, John, what do you ask me? It's true.
That's why you went last.
Yes.
Yes. Or do I need to ask an entrenched academic? Maybe that's the question I should ask.
I'll say a couple of things.
Yeah.
I mean, critical mass is fantastic on very many levels. What it sounds like has happened in Leicester, which hasn't always happened with critical masses, is there's a deliberate attempt, which sounds like it's been successful so far, to build an inclusive mass, which is brilliant, you know. And obviously, you know, I mean, the impulse behind critical mass is to create a democratic space within the city which enables cycling at the expense of car driving for a moment. You know, it's a revolutionary moment, isn't it? And it's then how we translate that moment into a duration, which is kind of a longer term challenge. But so I think critical mass is very good at doing that, and to build an inclusive critical mass is marvellous. So yeah, well done everyone who's done that in Leicester, and long may it continue. If it's the kind of thing which we need more of, yeah, I mean, you know, I suppose as a sociologist I'm obviously interested in civil society, and one of the things I'm particularly interested in is how we build a dense and multifaceted civil society of cycling, you know, that can engage in multiple ways to multiple people across the city. And, you know, I mean, the example we get from the States here, I suppose, of where that's being done particularly well, apparently, is Portland, Oregon. Although the impression I also get from Portland, Oregon is it's actually quite a sort of anarcho kind of countercultural kind of civil society of cycling that's being built. So again, there's that tension, I think, which I will talk about tomorrow in my stuff, and which I think we're all confronting, probably no matter what we're doing to promote cycling, between kind of building strong cycling cultures and then how you translate those strong cycling cultures to a much more broader, inclusive level that resonates with, you know, the wider population of the city. I think that's the challenge. Obviously, the denser the civil society of cycling is, the more possibilities occur for that to happen. But also, there's dangers, I think, of you building very strong, very visible cycling cultures that can actually send messages of elitism as well. So, you know, I think there's lots of stuff which needs working through and hopefully discussing now, tomorrow, and further on.
Can I say something about that? I think Portland gets noticed for that because it's a really homogenous city, and they actually have programs to try to draw in other types of people to cycling. I don't know if they're working, but in a place like New York, you have African American riding clubs. You have Puerto Rican riding clubs. And so you have self-organized groups just doing this stuff. And then you have huge numbers of people in cities like Los Angeles or New York who have no culture of it at all, except it's the way they get around because it's cheap and it's fast. And I don't know if they self-identify as cyclists or not, but you see a huge number of people of all cultures riding just because it works for them. Or ride to the subway because that's a quick way to do it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your introductions and also your questions. Hopefully, I've achieved two things. For those of you that have travelled a decent way or have invested your time in coming early, you've come to the right place, and that the Building Cycling Cultures Conference to you is going to be useful tomorrow. Yeah, and maybe kind of spark some questions, make people angry maybe about something they really want to know the answer about. You know what I mean? So that's a few nods. That's good. It's good. You've got to have angry people as well as happy people. I don't want it to be a happy clappy, all pat ourselves on the back. It's a cycling wonderful conference. It's about trying to deal with some real serious issues in there, and hopefully I've brought some of those out. So Who, from the floor, would like to kick us off? That man there was extremely quick. In fact, I don't know if you noticed, you actually rose. If you watch the video, you rose from the seat slightly.
Okay.
But there you go. Could you introduce yourself and where you're from, maybe, before you ask your question?
My name's Gordon Taylor, from Staffordshire in the Midlands. I'm just a keen touring cyclist, really. I was going to ask Karen, because I work with young people, I'm a teacher. Is there a dropout rate? Do children, young people, advocate bicycle use until they get a car licence? And then do they switch? Because in my experience, that's what we find.
Well, New York City is perhaps not representative of the United States because car ownership, especially in Manhattan, is not high. I think what we face, we work with a lot of immigrant youth, and so coming to America means, you know, that they get a car as part of the deal. And so we do, they think that that's what they aspire, that's what their family, yeah. So I think that the instructors and the staff at Recycle a Bike hope to challenge that, you know, just because you're in America doesn't have to mean that this is what you aspire to. And often working with Hispanic young men, we found that originally they're like, oh, wearing Lycra has all these associations, and they wouldn't, you know, they couldn't understand why we were suggesting for a long trip they wear Lycra. And in fact, after a painful attempt at riding that far with their jeans was suddenly getting that, oh, now we understand. And then it became, we created a culture in a middle school where the teens would get hired back as mentors in the after-school program, and they became seen as the cool group of kids that got, you know, they got a job, they suddenly had the best bikes, and they were wearing Lycra, and it became sort of a badge of honor instead of a badge of poverty. So I think it was that perception. Do we affect the broader culture? The kids in our program, I think, do get that. Not everyone stays in the program. So,
Shall I dive in there, Karen? Have you got a specific reason for asking
No,
that
not
question?
really. I'm a teacher, and all the children I teach in a kind of difficult school aspire to have a car each. That's the kind of assumption that we're all going to have a car each. And whilst they're quite keen cyclists and bikeability and everything else, there's still this aspirational
yeah,
thing that it's seen as a step up.
Isn't it brainwashing?
Yeah, I think it's so deep. I wondered if it was the same in It's just so deep in the next stage, the final stage of being a car, and then a better car, and two cars.
Has anyone else got something to build on that? Yeah.
Oh,